Ladies and gentlemen, I got something in my eye. Oh God, there's a little squig. Oh, it's gotten worse. We're talking about the Stabbomancer. I know people already covered it, but actually there's some things that, because we know what other classes do, it's huge. Also, I'm sorry I was in my eye. I know it's kind of gross. It looks off-putting. Anywho, ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to be talking about the Stabbomancer, which is very much seeming like it's going to be a class that I thought was just going to be a critical kind of melee class. But the more I look at it and the more I think about the other classes and the way that they can synergize, he kind of also looks like he could be, if you really are careful with the points you spend, a status person. So like an elemental applier, and also very, very much like a character named Zero with kunai. I know I've said that beforehand, but this is way more than I actually thought. Also, thank you so much for watching these videos. I'm surprised that you all just wanted to talk about characters with me. I thought this was a niche thing for me. I was being very selfish and me throwing this at you, but a lot of you guys actually enjoyed it, which is wonderful. Thank you. Anyway, so let's get into this without further ado. This is the Stabbomancer. They specify the Stabbomancer as a specialist of critical hits and status effects. Yes, okay, that makes more sense. Yeah, keeps enemies guessing by alternating between guns and melee and spells. Basically, he has various buffing abilities that affect getting more damage when you melee getting more damage, guns getting more damage when you melee. They're like the inverse of those things, so yes. So his class feat is actually incredible. Dirty Fighting. The Fate Maker critical hit chance is increased by 20%. It's huge, like huge. So you have a huge crit chance ability. So most of your attacks, by the way, if you don't know anything about critical hitting in the game, critical hitting is no longer just hitting a headshot. It's any kind of damage dealt has the chance of being a crit hit, with few exceptions to class-specific abilities that say we cannot crit because if it could, it'd be nuts. But yes. Anyways, his action skills are Ghost Blade. The simple TLDR of this is you're going to summon forth this spinning, double-sided blade, kind of looks like a twin blade if you're playing Elden Ring right now. Just spins around a lot, but it does melee damage periodically, and it's based on the Fate Maker's equipped melee weapon. Now, we don't know the specificity of this, but we do know a little bit. One of the things that we know is that there is something that's on your melee weapon called attack speed, or melee speed, and essentially, that is going to increase the spinning of your blade, aka the amount of times you can deal damage. So if you have a really, really slow melee weapon, it's going to be going very, very slow. But if you have a very, very fast attacking melee weapon, this blade is just going to start spinning like a tornado. Awesome. But we don't know if it also takes other things from his melee weapon, such as maybe like elemental, if you have a fire sword, if you have a special effect on your melee weapons, which, by the way, one of the cool things on your melee weapons are things like when you land a melee hit, you take off a second off of your spell or cooldown action ability just by making contact with a melee weapon. We don't know if that's the case. Regardless, it's still something cool to note for a lot of the melee classes that every time if you do hit an enemy, you could just get your spell back in a couple seconds, given that it scales up, which I think it would. Anyways, the other thing that's important is you can actually teleport this blade around because enemies will just keep moving away from it. In fact, that's the one thing that I'm worried about this not being worth it, or at least not being worth it in terms of a damage source, because enemies will just keep walking outside of its influence and you're kind of just sitting there like, what the hell? And yeah, also it doesn't have a long cooldown or like duration, so you kind of just get a burst of damage and it goes away, which maybe is how it should be. Anyways, this one's far simpler. From the Shadows. This action skill puts you in an invisibility state and essentially makes it so that every single time you deal any damage, it's going to be a critical hit, but your critical hit damage overall is going to be reduced. It's not to the extent which it does not make this incredibly good, but again, From the Shadows is a very tight duration, doesn't really give you a huge amount of time. Think something like Falak, except maybe a little bit less. But yeah, no, so this is great. You're just going to get an automatic damage bonus. Also, enemies aren't going to be able to see you, so they're not going to be able to hit you unless they're doing stupid AoE attacks. So just overall good value there. So two really good action skills. This one's just fun. This one seems probably like really good, like regardless of what you do. Anyways, let's get into the skills and the passives. Arsenal. Melee damage is increased, everything's increased. Spell damage, gun damage, everything's increased. Just a nice 5 out of 5 pickup. But I will also say that usually when there's this much value in one skill, it's like incrementally being increased by like 10% of melee damage, which probably worth it, but still. Haste is really, really interesting. This is something that we're going to come back to, but it's movement speed. Anyways, melee attack speed is increased, movement speed is increased, and whenever you cast a spell, you are doubling both of those bonuses. So, again, this is something that you're going to want to correlate if you do go with the Blade of Haste, or Ghost Blade, sorry. Use a spell, activate your action skill, that will increase your melee attack speed, and that will make the blade spin faster. Also, if there's any double cast abilities or triple or 5 cast magic spells, that's going to be great to keep this on 100%, no cooldown. Awesome. Anyways, Potion of Poison. This is where he becomes a status kind of character. Status effect damage is increased, and also the duration of status effects are also increased. And a lot of things that people who had early access to the game, at least the demo, talked about is how status damage is actually something to write home about now. It's usually kind of like an afterthought. But no, it seems pretty good here, and we're going to talk about that more at the end. Anyways, tier 2, follow up. 3 points, not that much. Simply put, you shoot an enemy with a gun, your next melee attack is going to do more damage, but it's going to consume all of the stacks that this is gaining. Cool. Pretty chill, not that bad. Well, hopefully it's worth it. But also, I wonder if that stacks with Ghost Blade. So if you shoot an enemy with a bunch of bullets and then you activate Ghost Blade, does that instance that damage, or is only the first hit of the Ghost Blade going to take those stacks? That'll be interesting to see. Anyway, Swift Death. While moving, the Fatemaker grants increased damage dealt. The faster the Fatemaker moves, the greater the bonus. The reason why I'm speaking annoyingly is because Swift Death synergizes with a bunch of other classes, because you're going to be dealing overall more damage dealt. That's something that in the build community is like a hot button, like, oh my god, because, and it rightfully should be, it's any sort of damage that you're outputting. That's spells, that's action skills, that's gun damage, that's anything else that's maybe an other signature damage source. Any damage dealt is going to be enhanced based on your movement. So, for instance, we know there are certain skills called Hydras in the game, which basically is like a turret, and if those things can get instanced, or even if they can't, you're just haul-assing, running really fast, activating this Hydra spell, and that thing is going to be doing an incredibly more damage. So yeah, maybe it's not instant, so you'd have to keep running around in circles, but even still, that would help you deal with the aiming to speed ratio, because that thing is going to guarantee hit, and who knows what kind of other spells there are. If there's just like a giant AoE on the ground, so you activate an AoE, you hit, hopefully you're dealing enough damage to where the AoE is pretty good, and you're knocking enemies dead. And again, there's other classes that have increased movement speed, so just take note of that. You can make that even better, and that will just increase the damage that you're able to do. Awesome. Exploit their weakness. Whenever the Fatemaker applies a status effect to an enemy, the affected enemy takes increased damage from all sources for a set duration. This effect can stack per unique status. This is where, like, this character is essentially the damage character. Even if status effects suck, you're doing stuff like this. You're getting synthetic base damage dealt just by moving quickly, sprinting, which we're going to be able to do easier when we get lower in the skill tree. Anyways, but it doesn't even talk about status effects being good. If a status effects are on an enemy, and they're already, if you have this skill, they're already taking a longer duration for status effects to be on them. So they're basically going to be taking more damage from multiple sources. And also, it's going to be pretty easy, I would assume, to have multiple statuses on enemy. You have your spells, that's one status. You can have poison on your spell. You can have a gun that shoots multiple projectiles. We'll talk about how that's going to be good in a minute. You can have a crossbow that shoots multiple projectiles. It could be fire, sure. And then you could have a melee weapon that is special into, what was it, electricity, whatever the other elements are. That's 3 types of elements already applied on a target, and we already know you can switch between elements given Mollywan kind of weirdness or whatever faction is going to take that place, and that's just going to increase damage dealt. And a lot of this seems like you could play a weird build where you summon a Hydra, or have an AoE globe spell, which is also a thing in the game, and you're sprinting around, and also, yeah, everything's going to be taking more damage, and you're going to be dealing more damage when you're sprinting. Anyways, that's really, really good. Also, again, the effect stacks. So if you have all elemental effects on one enemy. Oh my god, oh, I just thought of that. Holy shit. Okay, so keep this in mind. So this would become exponentially more OP if, maybe possibly, you were able to hyper stack a ton of elements, maybe all of them, on an enemy. Remember this skill, my friends, because that just clicked in my head. Oh my god. Anyways, we'll get to it. Tier 3, Nimble Fingers, 3 points, not that much. Whenever the Fatemaker deals melee damage, their fire rate and spell damage is increased for a set duration. It feels like these are kill skills without being kill skills, but sure. But yes, you hit something with melee, you're going to be getting an amplitude of damage. This is why Ghostblade is also pretty good, because melee damage is what we're going to be technically doing. So as soon as we activate Ghostblade, we're going to be easily able to dip into more fire rate and more spell damage. Also, I would be shocked if there wasn't a gun that counted as melee damage. Also, I would be shocked if there wasn't a melee weapon that does the classic fantasy thing where it's like a tether of light, a blade streak going forward, aka ranged melee damage. Even if it's on a cooldown, just for have this to be able to use that to proc it without having to get point blank into a boss's AoE zone or something, that could be super attainable, I think. Anyways, Shadow Step, 1 point. This is kind of like a middle tier capstone, I believe. Kill skill. The Fatemaker's next melee attack is a guaranteed critical hit for a short duration. This is pretty good. So as soon as you drop one enemy, you chuck your Ghostblade on something else, it's going to be doing more damage. This is also kind of synergizing with the Graveborn's Capstone, which is whenever you activate a spell, you're going to be able to do basically a guaranteed critical hit. But with the way you're going to be investing in other things that increase your critical hits damage, it's weird, but if you're able to get a kill with Ghostblade, then this could be better, but I don't think this one is too crazy, but we'll see. Anyways, Tier 4, Sneak Attack. This one's hilarious. It's Sneak Attack. It's just increasing critical damage. So, yeah, no Sneak Attack there, but this should offset heavily the loss of decreasing your critical hits damage itself. If you are planning on using From the Shadows, I bet it kind of balances out. And this is where things get nuts. So we already talked about how just moving quickly will increase your overall damage dealt. Right here, Swift Death. Increase your damage dealt based on your movement speed. So now we have this perk called Evade. 1 point max, so this is a kind of a capstone thing as well. You can now shoot and sprint at the same time. That's 1. Okay? Gain the ability to evade oncoming damage while moving. This is basically avoiding 100% of whatever damage is dealt to you based on a movement speed. So this becomes exponentially better if you're moving faster. So like it says right here, the faster you move, the greater the chance for you to avoid all oncoming damage. Insane. So you're not only getting the cool Moe's Sprint Forever, which also didn't make sense for Moe's because Moe's was like splash damage character and you just kill yourself if you're running towards your enemy. Anyway, didn't make no sense. But this one makes more sense. This synergizes, where you're going to be trying to move around anyway. We don't have too many survivability skills in this besides literally going invisible, which has a cooldown. But this will allow you to kind of keep your head above water, probably, hopefully. But regardless, two awesome abilities in one. Really, really good. Anyways, Contagion. This is just cool for the like Gearbox learning in a cool way. Whenever the Fatemaker applies a status effect, there is a chance to spread to nearby enemies. If no enemies are nearby, deals a percentage of the status effect's total damage to enemies instead. So this is cool because beforehand we would just get like, you can spread elemental damage to enemies. Cool, neat, if you kill them usually. But also, it just says, whenever the Fatemaker applies a status, so it doesn't even mean you need to like kill the enemy with a status in order for it to spread. You just need to apply a status and then it's just gonna run around to everybody else. And I imagine the range and whatnot gets better as you do it, or the chance gets better as you level it up. But regardless, the fact that it also has a thing that's good for like overall ad control and then also bosses is awesome. Again, there's a lot of stuff that's not very melee focused here. If there is, it's like, sure. You know, like, when you go to kill, melee guaranteed crit, sure. When your Fatemaker deals melee damage or spell damage or whatever, it gets increased. We're almost at the bottom, boys. Hold your horses, okay? We're about to get there. Tier 5, this is very, very deep in the capstone, or in the skill tree. 1,000 cuts, 5 points. Heavily investment in this. Critical hits grant the Fatemaker increased damage dealt. That's everything. That's everything. For a duration of time. Okay. Also, this effect can stack up to 10 times. Melee critical hits grant additional stacks. Okay, so again, that's just by getting critical hits, and it's not like these degrade really fast, it seems. So the fact that you're just going to have to guarantee get a critical hit, which you're already going to be able to do because there's ways to increase your critical hit with just in your stats, your special abilities, class mods, stuff like that, as well as you're getting his Capstone, which is, or his feat, sorry, which is getting you 20% extra critical chance, which is nuts. So yeah, you're just going to be increasing overall all your damage dealt. That is melee, that is spells, that is if you have companion classes, those count as your damage dealt, your output of your damage. If you have status, AoE, anything, like this is where the character starts to really seem like, oh, people were assuming, at least I was, that he was a melee enhancer / assassin-like class. No, he's a status buffer and just overall damage buffer, very similar to Zane. But yeah, like this damage dealt could be applied to the spell shot, could be applied to the Clawbringer, could be applied to the Berserker. All of this, if you're just moving quickly and using like there's guns use status, melee weapons probably will use status, and of course spells use status. I don't think there's going to be a physical version of spells that doesn't have any element tied to it usually. So he's going to be able to synergize really, really well with them, especially if you're just dipping in to his half value skill tree. But if you're able to get all the way down to the bottom like this, I think you're just going to be getting a lot of synthetic damage. Now the question becomes, is it better to invest in like spell shots, end game spell and specific enhancing, or is it better just to say, no, you get way more value out of just going to the Berserker and getting a couple things from the spell shot? Of course, their capstones make things hard in terms of choosing, but we'll get to that later. Anyways, this is just a super good skill. And then we have one more final hurrah, which is Alchemist Agent. Okay, this is the one I wanted to tell you guys about. This was the big pooba. Now, one of the most popular kinds of weapons in Borderlands 3 was a shotgun, and also they later introduced a lot of other weapons that actually had melee damage, or at least they counted as melee damage. So if there's one of those weapons, or if there's a sword that does like no damage but happens to hit with like a thread of light or something, ranged melee damage essentially, then this is going to be huge. And if you can massively apply this, say it's in the same form as it was in Borderlands 3, where there was a shotgun with like 4 pellets or 14 pellets, and they all counted as melee damage, you're going to be able to hyper stack status effect on an enemy. So as long as there's one weapon in the entirety of the loot that exists within that game, in Wonderland, that is a gun that shoots melee damage and hopefully shoots somewhat fast. If it's a sniper, then it's just kind of shitty. But if it's a melee stacking damage, a shotgun or a machine gun, then you're going to be easily able to apply a shit ton of status to one enemy. Because remember, yeah, so whenever we apply a status effect to an enemy, they are going to take more damage from all sources. Also, you can stack status effects on them to let them take greater damage. So, as long as there's any way to make it so that there's a lot of status happening to the enemy, you're going to be good to go, essentially, which is awesome. And lastly, so that's why I was freaking out, by the way. I will say, I did think this was just critical hits, but it's melee critical hits apply random stats. So this also makes Ghostblade a little bit better because you're just throwing this around. Again, I think there's gonna be weapons or even just ranged melee weapons that you're gonna be able to equip to give you melee damage at a radius, at a range, sorry. And yes, anyways, the Capstone, Tier 6, Executioner's Blade. Gun and spell critical hits have a chance to create an ethereal blade after the target that will impale them after a short delay. I wonder if this means they can like sidestep it or if it's like AoE bit, hopefully. Anyways, an ethereal blade that deals melee damage based on the Fate Maker's equipped weapon. This is a skill to me that's interesting, but also, yeah, so first of all, this can detonate by gun critical hits and spell critical hits, which is really, really good. It's weird that it doesn't trigger on melee critical hits, so you're still gonna need to shoot. It's odd, but sure. But needless to say, this Capstone is not very status hungry. Instead it's more about like, this is where the Capstone I feel like sometimes corrupts the whole build, and you're like, ooh, you know, gun and spell damage critical hits give me a melee proc, which again feeds into his whole like kind of try to do everything meta. But the Ethereal Blade says it's going to do more damage based on your equipped melee weapon, so there's going to probably be melee weapons that are like really, really slow, which is bad for the Ghostblade, but there's also attack speed buffers in the skill tree. But that would make this Executioner's Blade that pops up hit really, really hard. Now, it's yet to be seen what this skill looks like in action. The fact that it says after a short delay, makes me curious about if an enemy can dodge this, or if there's going to be like enemies that are flying like wyverns. Like, is this just going to pop out of the ground and completely miss them? Or is this going to be like the most awesome thing to see, where like a giant sword will just come like jutting out of the ground and reach no matter where the height of the enemy is? That would be really sick. I don't think that would be how it would work, but anyway. Also, I don't know how this would work with bosses. Would you just see like a chunk of damage like dissipate after this sword just jams out of them maybe? I don't know. I don't know how big it is. Regardless, some takeaways that I really want to talk to you guys about is just, to me, the absolute synergy that exists within status. So let me just point some stuff out. The first skill, it seems like the right column of the skill tree is going to be all status. Like, you can even see it all looks like kind of pots and poisons and stuff like that. Anyway, so this one, if I was making the build, I would go with the increased status and the duration. Awesome. Although that may not be where I would start. I'd probably respec, because I feel like there's more value to have here early on. But yeah, you need to stack value as you go, and that would be a little hard to do when you're just starting up. But anyway, absolutely go 5 out of 5 with Swift Death. You just need to keep your ass moving, and you're just going to increase all your damage dealt. Incredible. Also, the faster you move, the more damage you're going to deal. Great. So you just need to be sprinting, and yeah, and there's a lot of AoE spells. You'd probably be pretty good. I'd also probably get this one, or at least some of this one until I can progress. Whenever the Fatemaker applies a status effect, the enemy that it basically takes more damage from all sources, and also you can stack more status effects on them to have them take more damage. I would put a couple points into here, or I might go back and get something else that's to me equally valuable, but that should actually get me to where I only need to put 1 or 2 points if I fully invested in these two, because these two are kind of melee specific and I'm not quite going for that. Regardless, critical hit damage is increased. Absolutely get that. It's just 100% good pickup. I don't know why you wouldn't. Evade is probably the first pickup you'd get, because it's going to increase your survivability window and also give you the ability to cast spells, do everything it seems like, and sprint at the same time. Although maybe you can't cast spells and sprint. Maybe it's just shoot. So it says now shoot and sprint at the same time. So maybe you couldn't cast spells and do that. Weird. In fact, would that be the way that they would counter like the spell meta? So like, say if you're moving really, really fast, yeah, that might nerf it a little bit if they do that. Interesting. So like, you know how I was saying like you could just sprint your ass off and then use your Hydra, but maybe by using your spell you slow down immediately. I think you could jump and use your Hydra still. But anyway, just something to think about. They may nerf that in a way because it specifies shooting. Anyways, so now I would go with Contagion, absolutely. And I'd put whatever point I would need to progress downwards. Critical hits, critical hits increase the Fatemaker's base damage dealt. This effect stacks, and also if you want to get in close in melee or get those stacks up by just using Ghostblade, you could do that as well. And then of course, I guess I would get this just because it's 1 point and we're already this deep into the skill tree. But yeah, that'd be the route I would go, just basically buffing a shit ton of status and I guess a little bit of melee. But it would depend on how good the melee accounts, because again, when it says buffs your melee damage, if there's weapons that get buffed by your melee damage, do they get buffed by your whole class's melee damage, or do they get buffed by your melee weapon that you're holding? Because I can see them making that distinction. So if there's a gun that's taking from melee damage, counts as melee damage, does it take it from your skill tree, or does it take it from your melee weapon, or does it take it from both? Because if it does both, then that's probably going to be a lot of power. Anyways, one thing I want to talk to you guys about is just the fact that there's a lot of value in just hyper applying a lot of statuses, weakening enemies, and moving quick. That's like at least the build that I like and I think it looks the most interesting. So there's a character that is just, to me, keeps getting more valuable, but it's the Clawbringer. For those guys who didn't know about this, the Clawbringer, just to do a quick TLDR, not only are you just getting a free wyvern that's going to do fire breath, okay, awesome, but also if you just push down its skill tree a little bit, you're going to be getting various buffs to your shooting. Also, it's also going to give your wyvern companion the ability to do fire damage. Also, if you get this one, it's also going to get your wyvern companion to do lightning damage, which, considering it already does at a base fire breath, you might want to go into the melee specific skill and give your companion the ability to do more lightning damage. Also, this I think would affect Ghostblade to do lightning damage as well, because it changes your melee attack to do that as well. The lightning damage. This one's pretty nice. Just decreases your action skill cooldown, so you get to Ghostblade faster, as well as going invisible faster. And then there's stuff like this. Yeah, this is where, are we going to be able to reach this? This is my only worry for Clawbringer, is because It's this. It's the, can you get deep enough into the skill trees in order to get the most value out of here, because they put a lot of the value on 4 and down, and usually you're only able to make it to 3 if you do both, at least at the beginning of the game, Wonderland. They'll probably increase the cap, level cap eventually, but yeah, this is a kill skill, so whenever you kill an enemy, you're going to deploy a fire orb, or if you kill them with melee damage, or ability damage, which could be your Ghost Blade, I would also think would be considered an ability damage, it will throw out a lightning orb. So you're doing just passively with your Wyvern, even if you don't go this deep, just passively with this Wyvern, you're doing fire damage on enemies or applying fire statuses that also can spread to other enemies, which is nice. But you're also doing lightning damage if you just go a little bit down here. Now you're doing lightning damage. That's awesome. And if you're willing to go even deeper, now your Wyvern companions now throwing fire orbs and all that stuff, or lightning orbs. So basically, you're taken care of with fire and lightning. So now you only need to get a spell that does poison or cryo or whatever else exists within Wonderlands, elemental wise, and do all of those things. And to me, that just seems awesome. Awesome. Regardless, yeah, this just looks fun to me. This whole build, these two kind of being like these crazy elemental like throwing everything around. Also, you have like this spinning blade that you're just teleporting around and wrecking. I would say I think that the damn where is it? Where are you? This person screwed my whole life up right now. I thought this was the ability. This one makes things complicated because his capstone's really good. After you get a kill, it reduces your action skill or gives you an increased action skill duration. So it makes the melee perception of the Clawbringer and this person really, really good, because you basically just have unlimited Ghost Blade. Jesus, as well as just a ton of other like fire rate and melee attack speed increases. So these two also really synergize, especially if you're more attracted to like the melee things, because again, I'm looking at it through status, but there's a lot of skills that the Berserker or Stabbomancer, sorry, has that's just good value overall. So yeah, if you're interested in the Stabbomancer, he's a good bet, I think. Also, he's a character that I think is going to be easy to get a lot of value out of early on. Maybe not as much as the Greyborn, but still. But alas, ladies and gentlemen, hopefully you enjoyed that. I love talking about this stuff. I'm so excited. Also, by the time this gets to you, we're probably really close to, of course, the game coming out, which I'm so excited. But the next video, hopefully that's even closer to when it's coming out, is going to be the class that I'm going to be going into the game with, talking about overall synergies and why I'm so excited for a lot of them. And yeah, thank you so much for your time. Hopefully you guys do enjoy the rest of your day. Hopefully you guys check out some of the Wonderland content when it comes out that we cover, when we stream it, when we make videos of it, when we showcase certain things. Hopefully I can see you again. Thank you again, and goodbye, my friends.